everybody? I am so super excited to be here and to be a part of this. We're going to get started in just a second as I see our attendee list growing and growing. So I am super excited about that. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. I am Oh, the recording stopped, but that's probably because we're streaming now on YouTube, right? Okay, great. Well, just as we get started, I'm Dr. Tanisha Singleton. I am the interim president on the board for Black Girl Hockey Club. If I haven't had the pleasure of meeting or engaging with you before, hello, welcome. It is a pleasure to meet you. And it is my pleasure to introduce today's very, very special event, Get Uncomfortable, a Juneteenth discussion with Black Girl Hockey Club. And, this event it's being live streamed on our Black Girl Hockey Club YouTube channel as well. So I want to give a shout out to everyone who's watching that way as well. And also everyone who registered and is watching with us right now through Zoom. We've got a lot in store for you over the next 90 minutes. So as our attendees are getting settled and trickling in, I just want to take a few moments to give a little bit of logistical information, some updates on what is happening with Black Girl Hockey Club, and then we'll kick it off to our notoriously badass co-hosts and our terrific panelists who all collectively have taken time out of their busy schedule to be with you all today. And we're talking about things that are very, very important, okay? But also for logistics, if at any point you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature here in Zoom. And shout out to our awesome volunteers who are going to be helping facilitate, get those answered. And also, if you are watching over on YouTube, you can get over there and chat your comments and questions as well. I will be over there helping moderate and facilitate that. And I've got the quick fingers today, so no foolishness, okay? I'll be quick to ban and report y'all, okay? Like nuck if you buck, all right, if you want to, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's been a day and a half already, but I'll be over there helping chat and engage with you guys all throughout today's event, okay? So just quickly, if you haven't followed me on Twitter or seen me in any of the other Black Girl Hockey Club events, I am all about engagement. I'm all about community and certainly making sure we all have a good time. And professionally, and really one of the things that I am driven to bringing into Black Girl Hockey Club, it's about reinforcing personal joy. And it's about piercingly positive shared experiences. But, for Black folks, Black women, women of color, people of color in general, we have a very different shared experience. And many of us are not privy to that personal and collective joy I just talked about. Instead, it has to be a very radical act, because to be happy and to have freedom, that has to be done in a very radical manner, right? It's not simply granted to us like it is to others. So think about that word, emancipation, that word that is core of what this day means. It means to be set free. To be set free, think about that. That means Black folks were never born or placed or considered to be in the position in the first damn place. Think about that, right? We have to fight continuously to be free, to have joy, free to have fun, free to play hockey, free to watch hockey, right? Without having to be yelled at, without having to be called something derogatory. So I think some of us here, that was all about what the Get Uncomfortable campaign is, because I think just now some of us are learning that is the reality for many of us, right? Things that have been very, very negative. But it's better late than never, I guess, right? But that is really what Black Girl Hockey Club is rooted in from day one. It's about making sure that we do everything we can to serve our own, because we're not going to wait another 156 years. I'm telling you that right now, okay? We're not. So instead, we will keep celebrating our summer scholarship winners as we did all throughout this week. We awarded 14 young Black girls $1,000 scholarships to offset some of the costs so that they can continue playing hockey, in spite of the systems that tried to prohibit that. This past week, we launched our leadership and development program, creating mentorships for young Black leaders of all gender identities to make sure that they have opportunities to not only gain access to having relationships with people in upper positions of authority in hockey, but also to make sure that they're gaining the personal and professional skill development that they need to be confident about the things that they're passionate about. We're facilitating regular meetings with all of our committees across policy, advocacy, coalition, organizing, communications, all of this so that we are here for each other. That is what Black Girl Hockey Club is all about, has been doing, has done, and will continue to do moving forward. In addition to hosting events like this, which enough about me and from me, I want to introduce our co-hosts here. First, Erica Ayala, what it do? Erica, if you do not know, New York-based freelance multimedia journalist. She covers everything from women's basketball, hockey, soccer, everything from the New York Times, Sports Illustrated, The Athletic, ESPNW, all of the things. How are you, Vitamin Bloop?
Vitamin Bloop, let's go. See, I was so excited and just into what you were saying that I had myself on mute. So what to do? I'm here. We good. Let's go.
Absolutely. And her co-host for today, Queen Shireen, what it do? How are you?
I am not going to try or attempt to drop rhymes. It's not going to, I don't want to embarrass myself and everybody else. I'm so happy to be here. Eric and I were just sort of vibing a bit before the event started. This is actually the first thing we've been sat together on. And so I'm delighted. I'm honored to be with all these amazing people and to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And if you do not know about Queen Shireen, don't sleep on either of these women, okay? Multi-platform sports journalist, TEDx speaker, mentor, award-winning sports activist, one of our mentors for our leadership and development program, co-host and co-creator of Burn It All Down Feminist Sports Podcast, doing all the things. These two professional badasses I look up to and give me joy and inspiration when I just want to lay down and eat ice cream sandwiches. But enough about me. I'm going to kick it over to these two badasses and I will be back towards the close. But again, I will be over in the YouTube chat if you have any questions or comments. And remember, you can do that here if you've registered and are attending via Zoom. So thank you all and stay tuned because you've got a great event coming up. Erica, Shireen, off to you two.
Let's go, Shireen. I can't believe this is the first time that we are doing something together IRL, even before the pandemic. It's wild.
It is. Well, we actually hung out at the CWHL All-Star Game, which is the last time we had a chance to hang out. But you were working and I was fangirling in the stands. But we had ourselves a little melanated crew over there and that's awesome. Right. It was good times. Good times. And then when this plague is over, we're hoping to do more of that.
Definitely. But as Dr. Tanisha Singleton said, we are here to talk about emancipation and the movement forward from. And as it was also mentioned, I am actually in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm going to talk a little bit about the significance of that, especially in 2021. But first, let's start, Shireen, with Juneteenth. Juneteenth is June 19th, 1865. Got my shirt right over here. And that was the moment in history that finally the enslaved people of Galveston, Texas were made aware that the Civil War had ended and that 2 years prior, President Abraham Lincoln here in the United States had issued the Emancipation Proclamation. As the story goes, and it's really, in my opinion, not hard to believe that the reason that the enslaved people in Galveston, Texas did not know that the Civil War had ended and that emancipation had been brought forth is because property owners wanted another harvest. And isn't that something? So Juneteenth is that celebration. It is that emancipation, that independence, and it has become culturally something that especially Black people in the United States celebrate. But I want to go to quickly, there was this article in the Boston Globe, and it was titled, "A Juneteenth holiday is symbolic," because in 2021, President Joe Biden has now announced that Juneteenth will be a federal holiday. So this is symbolic, but don't confuse it with racial justice. This is written by Renee Graham, a columnist for the Globe. And the story ends, or excuse me, the essay ends with, "And if we fail to recognize and challenge the difference between symbolism and social justice, that is, we'll keep getting symbolic crumbs while struggling for justice. And I think that's very apropos, especially, again, I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So 1865, Juneteenth, Galveston, Texas. 1921 in Tulsa. And you'll have to look up the whole story, but I'll give you the Sparks notes for some of y'all who actually know what that is. I'll give you the abridged edition, but because of racial tension, there was a man that was alleged to have sexually assaulted a white woman in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And when he went to trial, there were two mobs that set up. One was a white mob, and then to counter the attack and to make sure the brother was safe, there were, I shouldn't use the word mob, but there was a group of Black men and those who had just served in the Great War that were there to protect him, knowing what could pop off. And after that, just the presence of Black men, servicemen, just returned home from the Great War with guns, created this tension. And the white mob then burned and bombed Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was known, as you can see by my shirt, prior to that 1921 incident as Black Wall Street. Lots of Black wealth, Black businesses, and intentionally done that way. So again, we see that there is a history of, even when emancipation has come, even when there are communities of color building for themselves, that unfortunately white supremacy and racism and the residue of those continue to permeate, Shireen. And I'm talking about 1865, I'm talking about 1921, but we don't even have to go that far back. We don't have to go 100 years plus. There are things that are happening right now, Shireen, throughout North America, throughout the world, that are indicative of this tension between emancipation, true emancipation, and social justice.
Thank you, Erica. And for those like me, and I just want to hold a second and hold space for all the communities and you know, recognize that it's an Indigenous Heritage Month, that it's Pride Month, and hold all these places, and also recognize the spaces in which we are in the collective trauma, that to what Erica was speaking of. And in that, you know, we are here on Turtle Island. I'm a settler. We're all settlers on stolen land. And to talk about, you know, tragedy and trauma that's intergenerational and is cross community, and we know this, that our liberation is tied. We know our struggles are united in this. And just wanted to give pause for a moment for two particular things, in addition to here on Turtle Island, was the discovery and the unearthing of 215 Indigenous bodies of children outside a residential school in British Columbia. And just sort of say that this is the first. And if we listen to what Indigenous communities have been saying, if we listen to the way that Black communities have been talking, if they listen to the way that queer communities have been discussing this, this isn't new. This has always been there. And though there will be more unearthings, there will be more things. Very recently in London, Ontario, about a week and a half ago, there was a terrorist attack on a Muslim family there. So we understand that the systems of racism are deeply embedded into society. And we just wanted to hold space for Indigenous communities on Turtle Island, from the river to the sea, all over the world. We feel those struggles, we know those struggles, and we are standing in solidarity with you. And this event on behalf of Black Girl Hockey Club is to hold that space, have those unlearnings, understand. I am a very recent student of understanding 20th century and 19th century, 21st century Black American history, because it wasn't taught to me. And to be quite frank with you, I didn't even learn Indigenous history in the country where I live and was born and raised. So there's never a wrong time to learn and to unlearn. And that's why we're here. We will ask all our participants to join us in a moment of reflection, just so we can breathe. And if everyone needs to just check in with themselves and take a little bit of time, we're just going to ask that you join us for that.
And as the Kiswahili term goes, ashe. And Thank you, Shireen, for all of that. Thank you all for joining us. And as a reminder, you can use the question and answer portion of the Zoom call for those of you who are joining us on Zoom. You can also chat on YouTube. But a reminder to everyone, especially those who have registered for this event, that you will be getting a follow-up from Black Girl Hockey Club. All of the panelists that Shireen and I are about to introduce have offered reflections that they would like you to take away from this panel. And so we implore you to really use that resource. There is a great resource and things. I already see a question that hopefully we'll get to, but there are resources, and these panelists are going to help us to determine next steps for us all. But let's now, Shireen, get into the panel, and we are going to start with Mr. Bryant McBride, who is known for building businesses at the intersection of sports, technology, and media. He's done this for over 20 years, but he has also produced and finds time to promote social and emotional learning messages. We see that, of course, in Willie and the lessons from Willie, which I'm sure, Bryant, we will get into. He was, of course, a part of the early onset of what the National Hockey League was doing as far as diversity and inclusion, now what we know as Hockey is for Everyone, and is just a fantastic resource to have. So Bryant, welcome. Thank you for being here, and happy Juneteenth.
Thank you very much for having me. It's truly an honor to be here. Erica, it's been fun to work with you before and to watch your work grow over the last few years. Shireen, every time I read something, I learn. You are spreading knowledge at an incredible clip. And there's lots of people who really, really look to your voice to shed light on issues that all of us should be facing down. So it's an honor to be here. The invitation came a few weeks ago, and it really made me reflect and think a little bit about Juneteenth and other dates that were really important in this ongoing struggle, in this ongoing fight. And one of the ones that I'm gonna mention a couple, but one in particular that was not long after when Juneteenth was initiated is 1876, and that's a date that's really important in the United States. That was really the advent of the Great Compromise. That was the election between Tilden and Hayes, which was debated, was held in November, and then it wasn't solved until January. So there were months where there was these separate electoral college participants, and the Great Compromise, what it really did was it gave Hayes the presidency. Tilden stepped away and the Southern Bloc stepped away. But what it gave them was it gave them states' rights. And what it led to was Jim Crow. It led to 70 years of terrorism across the United States. Government-sanctioned terrorism in most cases, where a person of color was hung every 3 days between 1875, 76, and 1940. That's not talked about. Right. So knowing one date is important, but knowing other dates is also important. That was a bridge to the Second World War, where separate but supposedly equal armies defeated fascists. And for the reward that the soldiers who came back, well, I'll ask it this way, and then I've kind of tipped off the answer. But does anyone know the largest welfare program in the history of the United States? Any guesses?
Is it the housing for returning veterans?
That's exactly right. It's the GI.
Bam.
It's the GI Bill. The combination.
Listen, Bryant, you spitting some real knowledge right here. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about this.
Oh yeah, I'll get it. So what happened? What happened? It was very Roman, right? You faced bullets and you went to war and you came back and you got rewards. And those rewards were housing, right? But from the government, and or education. It was wealth creation, right? And you got those rewards unless you were Black, and you didn't. Exactly. If you were a GI, okay? And that started in 1876. It played out in 1945, right? And that division of wealth creation and the conditioning of, when you say welfare program, even people of color think the first thing that goes through your head terribly, because we've been conditioned, is a Black woman with children, right? The stereotype, the trope that has been instilled in our heads. So it's not that. It's that here the government gave everyone a leg up and said, go, we're going to create wealth with you. We're going to sanction it. And here we go. And literally that exclusion, because of states' rights, not being able to go to certain schools, not being able to live in certain communities, that literally is, you can draw a direct line to the disparity in white household income versus Black household income in the United States of 10 to 1. Those
And
three
I'm sorry.
connections, sorry, that's all right. Those three connections, literally, they're oversimplified, but not by much. That's where we are today.
And I love that you made that connection, right? Because I know of, especially being in New York, I know of Samuel Tilden. There's a statue of him right by Bank Street School. I used to go to that school. I know obviously of the GI Bill, and that had a massive impact also in New York. And Long Island, what we know now as Long Island. So for those who are following hockey, you might have heard of Long Island. But making those concrete connections is extremely important, Bryant. And I'm so glad that you did that. And that's exactly what we want to do here, in part, because these conversations have to continue. And that's why we have to really ground this and root this in history and in education. And that's exactly why we had Bryant join us today. But there are other elements of this, especially because Black Girl Hockey Club, in the name right there, we're talking about a hockey community. And so we have other people that are involved, including media and players. And so Shireen is going to help me introduce our other panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I'm just so listening. I'm taking notes as you're talking, Brian. But the other thing too, I think that we want to move from reflection to action. And this event is also about that. And joining us as well is Tara Sloan. Hello. I'm so happy to have you here. For those of you that don't know Tara, she grew up a hockey fan. I'm not going to give it away, but the team that we both actually support won last night against the Knights. I'm just going to drop that in there very casually. We're both media people. So she has a passion for music. She's actually was part of the Juno nominated and winning nominated rock group Joy Drop, and was a finalist on the CBS series Rockstar in Excess. She is super awesome, knows how to rock out. I look at her Twitter feed and I'm like, wow, she was so cool. I'm so glad we're friends now, but I would have loved to be friends with you 20 years ago also. She was looking for a next step in her career, and she's had the opportunity to work on TV all over the world. And she perfected her interviewing skills, which I think you'll see and you'll understand. And if you know her work, you know that's one like incredible. It's her forte. She was a host of Breakfast Television in Calgary, where she spent 5 years, and has worked with Sportsnet covering hockey, WHL, CS, curling, soccer, and bobsleigh. And curling's a big deal up in here, so respect. She's actually currently co-host of the groundbreaking NHL Rogers Hometown Hockey alongside Ron McLean, and actually is host of the weekly Sportsnet series Top of Her Game, focusing on stories of empowered women in the world of sports. It's a fantastic series. Tara is also a 2020 Canadian Screed Award nominee for her work in city TV music, a Budweiser Stage at Home, and we're so excited to have you here. I've also we've talked, we've texted many times, also the first time. And I'm so happy that you're part of this conversation, Tara.
Well, thank you. That's a very thorough introduction. And yes, I for sure was cooler 20 years ago, or at least I thought I was, but I definitely don't think I'm cool now. And neither does my daughter, who's sitting out on the porch outside. I won't go into too much detail, but Shireen and I were texting maybe last week, and we were actually texting about vaccinations, because in Canada, or at least Ontario, where we live, they're not so easy to come by, and it's been a bit of a mad scramble to try to get booked for one. So that was the root of the conversation. But I divulged to Shireen that I felt, well, obviously very humbled to be here, but I'm definitely having 50% like, what the fuck am I doing here? To be honest, because I just feel like, I mean, probably like everybody out there, the more I scratch at the surface of all of these conversations, the less rooted I feel. And I think on one hand, that's a really good thing, because, I think the more you dig deeper, the less your ego can take hold, and the more you realize that you have to learn and unlearn as the discussion goes. But it also is a very groundless space. And so I am soaking absolutely everything in. And so I approach all of this with really the utmost humility, and I'm beyond honored to be here with all of you. So thank you.
And we round out the panel for Juneteenth 2021 with Rebecca Morse. I'll probably refer to her as Moose for the rest of this, but she is a professional hockey player for the Metropolitan Riveters of the National Women's Hockey League. And she has played in this league for 5 seasons, all with the Riveters. And for the past 2 years, she has represented the Riveters as an alternate captain. She received the 2020 NWHL Foundation Award for her service to the game, and was a 2020 All-Star that was up in Boston. And of course, we cannot let anyone forget that the Riveters, Moose and the Riveters, won the 2018 Isabel Cup. But currently, Moose, you are the director at the Princeton Tiger Lilies, which is a premier girls hockey organization in central New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. Of course, New Jersey is your home state. We'll probably talk a little bit about that. You identify as a lesbian and are very outspoken for LGBTQ plus issues and population. And so I'm hoping that we get into that as well. You have been a supporter of civil rights, racial justice conversations in the hockey space. And we are so thankful that you are joining us for this Juneteenth panel. Moose, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Erica. It's nice to see you a week ago.
I know, in real life.
In real life, yeah. But happy Juneteenth, everyone. I'm really excited to be a part of the panel. I've been a part of Black Girl Hockey's events, a lot of them, within the last year plus, but as an attendee. So I'm really excited to be on sort of the other side of it now, because I always leave the events, learning a lot, but also feeling very warm inside. Like, this community is honestly amazing. And I feel supported by this community. And, I know that how important it is to get uncomfortable. And I think this is really the next step in the next phase in like my growth of getting uncomfortable, is having a conversation like this. I mean, I have done that in the past, but on a smaller scale. So I'm really excited to step outside my comfort zone even more and have this really important discussion. And I'm very humbled to be a part of the panel. So thank you.
And we thank you all for your sincerity and your authenticity, because this is also something that we wanted to do, was talk about how you got here. And if I can ask each one of the panelists to start, maybe on my screen, Tara, you're on the top right, so maybe we'll go that way. I was telling Eric about my mom brain. I needed to follow patterns. So if you could tell us how you got to Black Girl Hockey Club, like what brought you here?
Well, I don't know how far back to go. But I mean, you sort of gave my career trajectory. I would say as a person, as a girl growing up, I saw othering and it bothered me to no end. So that was always a theme. And another theme for me was having, being fairly outspoken and not necessarily, being okay with swimming upstream on occasion. But I have been really fortunate enough to find myself in a position, first of all, signing on to Rogers Hometown Hockey in 2015, which I believe is quite a unique show in the world of the NHL, in that we are able to tell stories outside of, at least then, what were more traditional hockey stories. I mean, I think the NHL world is perhaps starting to catch up, but we had a lot of license where we were like this little island in the middle of the hockey department at Sportsnet. And so, I give Ron McLean a lot of credit too. I think we had a whole crew, most of whom are still with us, who were trying to be representative of this country. But I'll full disclosure, we were doing it with an entirely white team of people. So there was at the same time an acknowledgement that we were missing some representation and some key elements, and still are. And there have been a lot of gaps and a lot of gaffes and a lot of mistakes, but we have really tried. So I give Rogers Hometown Hockey sort of a lot of credit. And out of that, I would say our show, Top of Her Game, was able to come out of that, but also formed out of a pandemic and the lack of live sports. So when everything came to a screeching halt, there was literally no programming on any network really, but Sportsnet was looking for content. So it was just a good opportunity to sneak in there and say, hey, there is no coverage of women's sports. We know typically it's 4 to 5% of sports coverage is devoted to women's sports. And so we snuck a show in there. And again, my intention and our intention was to try to be representative when telling stories, but we're doing it with an all-white team. And Shireen, you and I have spoken about that, and we're hoping to move the needle. But I would say, through my time on Rogers Hometown Hockey and through social media, which, as we know, at times can be a great cesspool of awfulness, but it can also be a place where community is seated and can flower. And so I have been so eternally appreciative because there's been so much nastiness, and so many times I have wanted to just close my computer and walk away and say, I don't want to be part of this hockey community anymore because it's too painful. And I know that I acknowledge my privilege in potentially being able to walk away. I understand. But I would say that I have felt completely hugged and supported and shepherded by Black Girl Hockey Club and the community that surrounds Black Girl Hockey Club. And so I'm very, very, very grateful. Moose.
Sure. So, I kind of touched on it already, but I'll piggyback off what Tara said. I've felt incredibly supported by Black Girl Hockey Club and this community in particular. And Erica, you were really at the forefront, I think, of introducing me to Black Girl Hockey as a member of the media, but also, Renee and Tanisha, everyone else as fans as well. You've had visibility within the Riveters, and being a veteran, member of the Riveters, we've been able to interact, and that's how I got introduced. And my experience has always been very positive and feeling supported, and just the way that you all spread so much love. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm about. And I think early in my NWHL career, I think that as players, as professional women's hockey players, a lot of us play, we realize that it's sort of, our mission is really bigger than ourselves. We're not playing for millions of dollars or anything. It's really for the next generation to build a sustainable league and give girls coming up what they deserve. So I think over time, as season to season, my mission has evolved, and maybe I was a little bit more self-centered in, why I wanted to play hockey professionally, maybe season one. And that's definitely changed throughout my NWHL career. Part of it is just, being a part of a league like that and surrounded by these incredibly strong women, and also just feeling empowered to speak my mind and use my voice, use my platform. But another part of it, I would say, is how my career sort of shifted outside of my playing career. I worked previously for a youth sports technology company, so it was really centered around kids. And then that shifted to me coaching full time and being a director of a girls hockey program. So basically my life revolves around hockey, and I wouldn't have it any other way, but it's really helped me realize my passion, which is to break down the barriers that there are that exist within hockey. And I mean, a lot of them are financial. I think it's no secret that it's a male dominated sport as well, and a white male dominated sport. And that's something that I'm passionate about changing, because it's going to limit the growth of hockey. And the sport is never going to be able to reach its potential unless we're welcoming and inclusive of people from different backgrounds. So that's where my work stems from, is just trying to attract more interest in the sport, and break down some of those barriers, because I know that I held off on playing hockey at an earlier age, at least competitively and in organized fashion, because I didn't think that girls played hockey. So for me, it's also very personal. Like, I would be that kid who was out, in the street, playing street hockey, rollerblading, with the kids in my neighborhood. I lived on a cul-de-sac, and I kind of just like hung back in the shadows for a while and just did that recreationally for fun with my friends, while my brother, who's actually younger than me, played for a travel team, and I would go to all of his practices, all of his games. Pretty much I would get dragged there. And that's how I learned the game. And that's how I fell in love with the game, in addition to just playing for fun. But I never thought, I was a very athletic kid. I played a lot of other sports, but I never thought that there was a home for me within hockey. I tried out for a boys team. I got cut from it. It's co-ed hockey, but there were very few girls playing in New Jersey at the time. So, I felt that, and that's also where my passion stems from, in addition to being a woman and fighting for equality within sport. That's really central to my existence. And, there's a million ways that you can make hockey more inclusive, and it doesn't, not just in terms of race, but I think where it hits home for me really is as a lesbian, and being able to speak out about pride and all of that. I think there's a lot of intersectionality there. So whatever way that we can expand the sport and make others feel welcome, and like hockey is for them, that's really what I'm here to do.
My turn. It's not so much as what brought me to Black Girl Hockey. I was psyched that you guys showed up. I'm the OG, right? I've been around for a while, and really started this work in earnest in 2000. Excuse me, in 91, 92 was when I went into Gary Bettman's office. I was the seventh employee that he hired. I was the first Black executive at the National Hockey League, and it was lonely. There was not a lot going on, folks. And the way that my parents raised me, my mom instilled and my dad instilled, if you're not part of this, right out of the MLK playbook, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And that never left me. And so when I got to the NHL, it wasn't on the agenda. It wasn't part of my job description, but I knew it was imperative. I knew it was critical that the game start to open its lens from here to here to accept all people. There were three players of color in the league when I first got there. There's now 30 to 40. So really, to your point earlier, Erica, the imperative is, how do we accelerate that? How does that change? How does it become inclusive, big I inclusive, LGBTQ+, obviously AAPI, BIPOC. How do we really break down the barriers so that when somebody walks into a rink with a hijab, they're not looked at as though they're from another planet, right? How do you feel welcome when someone's staring at you because you just want to go participate and you just want to partake in opportunity? That's the cultural, that's the root, that's the heart that the heart of the problem that we've got to figure out. And that comes from, I think, from a bigger look at the macro world first, right? We don't operate, hockey doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's impacted. You know, I had a conversation with, I won't name names, but I had a conversation with somebody about the January 6th insurrection. And we were getting a little bit pointed in the conversation. And I said, do not make me Photoshop the youth hockey jerseys of a lot of those people in that film. Don't make me put the jerseys on them. All right, don't do it, because you know that there were people. I mean, I live in Lexington, Massachusetts, this leafy green, progressive place. And, you know, my neighbor, my 12-year-old neighbor asked me the other day, you know, how come you have 4 Black Lives Matter signs on your front lawn? And I said, for everyone that was stolen, Simon, and we'll keep putting them back up. You know, that's just the messages, and that's the nature of the beast, you know, in the times that we live in. So taking those lessons and taking the bigger issues that are, you know, roiling the country, and saying, how do we apply this? How do we use that learning to apply to hockey? And here's 2 examples. We got it. Well, first, I mean, I guess the framing, you know, the framing narrative here is we got to get organized. We got to be thoughtful. We got to be intentional about what we're doing. In 1852, go back to history, because the lessons are there, right? They're there if we look hard enough. In 1852, Frederick Douglass. If you've not read Frederick Douglass's first autobiography, you're wrong. Read it. It's incredible. Talks about him escaping from, he was the most photographed man, the most listened to man in the 18th century. Okay, he's a badass. The word badass was used earlier. This guy was the badass of all badasses. Escaped from slavery, became one of the world's great orators. In 1852, in Rochester, New York, in front of his people, July 4th, he gave a speech called "What Does July 4th Mean to the Slave?" And what he did in front of all of these abolitionists, his people, he berated them and said, "How dare you ask me to speak on this day? This is not my holiday. This is a celebration of oppression and conquering and colonialism." And people were stunned. But the reason that he did it was to rally the troops and wake everyone up and shake everyone up, so much so that 13 years later, he was advising the President of the United States on how to end slavery. He got organized. In Birmingham, Alabama, Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael and everyone in SNCC and in the Southern Leadership Christian Conference, they were failing. They were failing in Birmingham, Alabama. People were not, you know, Black people didn't want to go out and protest. They were going to lose their jobs. It was hard. Right? These are really, really existentially hard questions. And no one was showing up for the protests. So they made an incredibly difficult decision. The decision they made was to use children. And they started the protests at 2 o'clock, 2:30. And that was Bull Connor and the fire hoses and the dogs and all the famous pictures that you've seen. And he got a call King got a call the day of the first visuals came out from Robert F. Kennedy and from the president, from John F. Kennedy, and they were screaming at him saying, "How dare you? How dare you risk children's lives?" Those are some of the hard decisions that were made, but they got organized and they realized, and they pushed agendas, and they made people really uncomfortable, right? To be able to make a point and to be able to move the agenda. Hockey needs to do the same. Here we are, I'll use the Black example, 4th Black, you know, revolution, if you will, right? Or Renaissance, to use the historical parlance. 1865 to 1976, right? Some political power achieved. The 1920s, the Black Renaissance, Harlem, Langston Hughes, Billie Holiday, etc. Civics in the 1960s with MLK, Malcolm X, and so on, right? Advances. Here we are. Big canvas, lots of paint. What are we going to do?
I love that you just likened, if I heard you right, Brian, I want to take from the top, make sure I heard you right. But if I hear you correctly, you are saying that hockey has the opportunity to be a renaissance when it comes to
absolutely. It's imperative. It's imperative. It's imperative that we are. Okay. And what I'm talking about is getting organized. No more starting organizations without real inclusion. Right? Let's all talk to each other. Let's all work together. Let's get organized. Let's be a clearinghouse, right? Rebecca's issues are my issues and vice versa, right? If one person is less than in this game, we're wrong. So from the NHL player standing in that scrum, being able to talk about the great compromise of 1876, right? Let's drop knowledge on people. Let's be buttoned up. Let's know what we're talking about, right? They should know about Mo Hashem's program in Toronto, right? And how he's helping teenagers get into the game in ways that they can't via the governing bodies, right? So let's like take a broader lens, include everyone, get together, use the resources collectively, and let's make some change.
And I love that, because Tara, I want to hop in here with you, because we talk a lot about getting uncomfortable, and what Brian is saying is exactly how things get done. Whether it's the United States, anywhere in the world, you have to get organized, but there is this tension, there's this discomfort. And Tara, you and Shireen and I are in a position where, as media, there's an expectation that media, whilst we're supposed to inform, there are also things that I would argue arbitrarily are set as boundaries for media informing people. So when it comes to getting uncomfortable, but when it comes to plugging into the larger system and what Bryant was saying, what has been your process as far as being able to navigate in the media space, whilst also being able to get a little bit uncomfortable and push the envelope so that we can be on the right side of history, but more importantly, that we are informing properly? Because I just want to offer this quickly. The Daily Show, so Trevor Noah and The Daily Show tweeted this: Happy Juneteenth, the first U.S. holiday that is illegal to teach about in the United States. I mean, this is what we're up against. So, I mean, there are things where we're celebrating Juneteenth, but we can't talk about it in the history books. Do you see, or should there be a role for media when it comes to some of that truth telling and being able to do what Bryant is asking all of us to do?
Well, I mean, I think there is a real push-pull. I have to tell you that every time my phone rings and it's one of my bosses, I think, oh shit, I said something on Twitter that they don't like. Or I've gotten in an altercation that they think is too much or something. And I've definitely had some hints of that, but I haven't had the full rap on the wrist. And I think, honestly, to tell you the truth, I'm outside just enough that they kind of leave me a little bit to my own devices. And that's a real position of privilege, along with my tenure in this business, the fact that I'm a white woman. So there are a lot of ways in which I am left alone. And so I think, I do try to push the envelope, both in content creation and taking chances. And I certainly do not always get it right. But I can tell you that, they are looking at, when I talk about I talk about broadcasters or any media organization. I mean, just look at the comment section. Look at who we're talking to. And so when you have people who are crunching numbers on one hand, trying to serve what they consider to be their primary demographics don't like a lot of what we have to say. They don't like the interview that I just did with a trans woman, So, and I do feel for my colleagues who are in more buttoned down positions. I think, I hate to scapegoat the NHL, but I know lots of people have wanted to see the NHL push a lot further and go a lot deeper in their anti-racism stances, work, education. Not to say that they're not doing things, but probably a lot of people would say it's not enough. And I feel that, there are boundaries that include, the threat of dismissal. So all I would say is, I know for me, of course, I am concerned about my livelihood, but I'm willing to walk that tightrope at this point in my career. But I'm privileged to be able to do that. I recognize that wholeheartedly. But
if I can, I think I'm going to print a bumper sticker that says "Take away Tara's tightrope."
Fall on the other
I'm
side.
serious.
Go.
I'm totally serious. There should be no tightrope.
Yeah,
Come on, guys.
I
Come on.
agree.
Let's get brave. I'm serious.
I mean, I
right?
think it's also, I just wanted to add to Tara that when you're being very gracious and generous when you say
Yeah,
you
for
don't want
sure.
to scapegoat the NHL, because we see them. I'm just gonna say that I'm expecting my phone to ring too any minute,
Well,
but it
I
is
just
what it
see
is.
like, is Kim Davis on this call?
Yeah, I
No,
know.
but you know what? Hey, but guys, listen, this is important.
I
This is
feel that,
important.
girl.
This is an important issue, right? I mean, I
I
was
agree.
there. I sat in that seat. I was in those walls, right? I partnered with them on this film I did, right? They have the bullseye on them, 100%. The letter that I'll just tell you, the letter that Gary Bettman wrote on George Floyd's the 1 year remembrance of his death, that was a breakthrough letter. I listen carefully. I talk to them all the time. I know them well. That was the most vulnerable, heartfelt, and I'd say this if he was on this screen, he may be listening, Kim may be listening, I don't care. Yes, that's better. That's better. That's a step in the right direction. This is about guts, right? This is about doing the right thing, looking back in history and going, what did you do? Were you there? Right? George Floyd's, to your point, Tara, George Floyd's death was such a crystallization of it all, and that it was irrefutable. It was reported in such a way that, hey, this guy, gave us a hard time and he perished in the middle of the struggle. As we all know, bullshit, right? And we know it because somebody had the guts to record it. 17-year-old girl had the guts to say, here, world, so that it was irrefutable. Just as irrefutable as what's written in Caste, in The Warmth of Other Suns, in the New Jim Crow, in just all of these irrefutable books that people need to read to understand the 360 perspective of what has happened over 400 years, right? So the crystallization was further amplified by the people begging to help, and then the guys not wanting them to help and keeping them, and then the cops keeping them from helping. Who are we? Are we in that line, or are we in the other line? Who are we?
I think what you're saying, Brian, is extremely important and goes to what Tara talked about earlier, which, if we're being honest, is privilege. Even going back to Frederick Douglass, there is a lot of tension that was around that movement of suffrage, because let's keep it real. When Frederick Douglass got his right to vote, if I were around during them days, I would have been up in the front pew, and then he would have been like, well, I got my vote, so.
Well, he did. He came around. He helped Susan B. Anthony, and he did come around. But yeah,
he did. And that's the point, though, right? And it goes back to what I said earlier from Renee Graham, the Globe columnist. If we're not able to recognize and challenge the difference, we have to know that there are differences in how all of us on this panel, we each experience privilege. So there are times where it is more comfortable for us to talk about certain things. And then there are times where we lack privilege for our voice to be heard.
Right.
And so
That's
Moose,
right.
And so Moose, I want to come to you, one, as a player, but even, you've talked about the LGBTQ plus community being extremely important to you, but you've had an opportunity, and you and I have talked about this. So, where you had an opportunity in your locker room as a part of the Riveters to be challenged in how about it you are about the LGBTQ plus community, because of the proximity of now entering a trans athlete into your locker room. And I want to talk about that. Let's be real about it, because we have to present honestly and openly the privilege that we have. And I think the reason we wanted all of you on this panel is also to talk about the times where that privilege becomes contentious with what we say that we stand for, and that there's always learning. So Moose, I want to talk to you a little bit about being a teammate of Harrison Brown and what that was like for you in your own path, as far as, again, being present for the LGBTQ plus community for women's hockey, and how has that translated into you learning how to be present for other communities?
Yeah, so being teammates with Harrison Brown, I think, like, my experience that season, it was very sobering, because here I am, a lesbian, and I'm like, okay, pride, and I'm really passionate about, my community and equality, equal rights. And at the same time, we've talked about this before, Erica, there was so much I didn't know. And I think I was very I was like excited to be teammates with Brownie, but there were some missteps along the way, and I thought I was more woke than I actually was. And part of the sobering moment was misgendering him. And it's something that I've written about, we've talked about it since, and I never addressed it directly with him at the time. This is years later. And I'm used to playing in a space with all females, or at least that's how they identify outwardly. And you're used to using she, her. I've always played with girls, like I touched on earlier. I've never played boys hockey. That first experience where I was cut from a boys co-ed team, I never tried again. So I was like, okay, this isn't for me. I was honestly discouraged by it because I thought that I deserved to make the team and that I didn't make it because I was a girl. So I stick with the girls from then on out. And again, I was just used to using certain pronouns. So it was difficult for me just meeting this new person. We didn't have a relationship prior to playing together for the Riveters. So, and it was something that just slipped out, and I felt terrible about it after. I think that it was even twice that I used the incorrect pronouns. Never had the conversation because I was very uncomfortable to have the conversation. And like, do you apologize? Do you say, oh no, he? So I kind of just went silent and didn't address it. But as I got to know Brownie a lot better throughout the season, I was no longer using the wrong pronouns. And like I said, though, I never had the conversation with him. So being able to like reflect on it now, and and I think I've made a lot of progress in terms of being more connected to the LGBTQ plus community and understanding the history better, educating myself on this community that I'm a part of, right? We've had the conversation since, and I asked him, I was open to the criticism. I'm like, hold me accountable. How should I have handled that situation? Would you have preferred if I had apologized then and there? And there were other people, other teammates around. So I didn't want him to feel embarrassed and make a big deal of it. And so I asked him, how he would have liked me to handle the situation. And it was, interesting to hear, because I think everyone's different. And especially from the trans community on, whether they want, it happens. So whether they want you to make a big deal of it and apologize and acknowledge it, or just brush by it and maybe revisit it at a later date. But it's important to, to listen and to accept criticism, be open to criticism, and ask those important questions, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think, I've learned so much from him, and taking it back to race now, I think that experience sort of prepared me for this season as being a leader, as alternate captain on the Riveters. And, within the last year since the murder of George Floyd, that's really when it started for me, my educational journey. This was something that I wanted to be at the forefront in terms of, conversations in the locker room, with our team. And it was very different. It was a very unique season, obviously, where, we were pretty much always masked, unless we were on the ice playing. And there were a lot of restrictions. So it wasn't like normal face-to-face interaction as much. We did a lot of Zoom calls prior to the season starting. And I hosted a conversation surrounding race, and that was something that was really uncomfortable for me, because I was early in my educational journey, and I know that I still have so much to learn, but I thought it was an important topic to touch on. And in the women's hockey space too, it's not something that's really customary to talk about in the locker room. You're talking about hockey, or about, you're joking around with your teammates. Serious topics are not very common in the locker room. So I think a lot of female hockey players can relate, where you just don't want to say the wrong thing. That's what I've always been worried about. And I had to let go of that, and, being comfortable saying the wrong thing, because that's the only way that you learn and grow, right? To know or this is another way you could look at it, or here. Having those conversations when we did regularly throughout the season, before the season even started, and then during the season, as we prepared for our bubble season in Lake Placid, and just being able to talk about it as a team was huge. And I think a lot of people were uncomfortable. I was definitely uncomfortable, but it's getting easier, and it's I think a lot of times now I don't hesitate when I'm saying things, because like I say the wrong thing, fine, tell me, please hold me accountable. I want to say the wrong thing so I know how to navigate these situations, and I learn from it.
I think that's so important. If I may call you Moose, I'm just doing it because Erica's doing it. But I think one of the things that's so key here is your acknowledgement of you will make mistakes. People will err. We're human. I mean, I'm a non-Black person of color, and my learning and unlearning was also similar. And it's important to understand those intersections. Not everybody's going to have cross identities or have access or even know about those. So you saying that you will make mistakes, but you want to be held accountable, which is such an important piece. Oh my goodness, accountability. And I'm so glad you said that word, because sometimes we find that people would rather not be called racist than actually dismantle racism. There's more of a fear of it. You don't want to be called, that's the worst thing imaginable, is to be called racist or accused, and people don't want to have conversations. So the idea of getting uncomfortable is not, it's not a catchy hashtag, although it is a very catchy hashtag. It's actually the fact that this is a necessary part of that. And something that Brian said that I want to ask about, Tara, in particular in view of, and because I have this camaraderie with you, we're in the same industry with Erica, bright spots. I mean, we're talking about joy. One of the greatest learnings I've had from Black teachers, Indigenous teachers, queer and trans women is holding hope. I mean, we don't get to check out. That's just not an option. However, what are the bright spots? Do you see any, Tara? And if you don't, could you just make one up for the sake of this conversation?
Do I see? Of course I do. I mean, and I think that this is what keeps us going, and they can be monumental and they can be incremental. But gosh, I don't even know where to start. I mean, I do. I see, even in I'll go back to the big corporation that I work for. I mean, there's a lot that's slow moving. But even the initiation of important conversations, the empowerment of people within large groups or hockey teams, these things are sort of cracks in the armor. And again, I'll go back to Rogers Hometown Hockey. I think for us, again, being afforded the opportunity for us to visit First Nations, to be hosted by First Nations, to present positive stories, and not focus on the negative narrative, to tell the stories of hope, and maybe shift people's perceptions. I think that possibility is always there. So I think, but even in the moments where I don't see, where I don't feel hope, I mean, I'm still propelled, but absolutely.
If I
think,
sorry, go ahead, Tara.
Sure.
I
was just going to say it feels at times we're swimming upstream, but I'm just looking at my daughter who's running up the stairs, and Moose, Rebecca, when you said talking about misgendering Harrison, I have 2 trans siblings, and one of them has been out for a long time, and I still misgender them on occasion, habits. And I have a daughter who's 11 years old who has never done that, and in fact is so conscious of they, them, non-binary, like, so I see hope in the next generation and their open hearts, and so we just got to feed them the right stuff.
Well, that's what I wanted to pick up on, was feeding them the right stuff. This conversation is so incredibly thoughtful, and the way that Moose, if I may, is talking about these issues, and Tara's talking about these issues, and the fear of misgendering someone, which is real, right? It's a slight, and it hurts. Comparing that to my friend Dre Baroni's example, he's on the board of the Carnegie Initiative with me, and he wrote this incredible missive. He's the first openly gay referee in the game. And he wrote this incredible letter about loving the game, growing up loving the game and hating the locker room. There was nobody thinking like Moose and Tara in that locker room, right? This is a few years ago, but still he had to sit there and listen to that. And I have 3 kids, and all I could think about was if my, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old was going through that. Right. And how it would be almost superhuman to continue on in the sport, despite having to sit there and listen to that. Right. Talk about toxic and being and pushing somebody away from the game just because of who they are. They'd have to put a mask on, and they'd have to put this false narrative front and center to be able to survive in the game. That's baggage nobody should have to carry. Right. So it's incredible that the thoughtfulness that is being, I just see it as just huge progress. So there is hope. And in terms of what they're being fed, right, it's what we're all being fed, again, from the macro to the micro. The macro, I'm going to ask you all a question, more history quizzes, but they're important because that's where the answers are often lie. Does anyone know who Julius Rosenwald is? Any idea? Julian Rosenwald was the Jeff Bezos of his day. He started Sears Roebuck. He got together with Booker T. Washington in 1912, and they created 5,000, this is crazy, 5,000 schools for Black children. They increased the literacy rate of Black children in 42 years, from 1912 to 1954, to Brown by Board of Education by 4 times. In 42 years, they changed the country, right? They taught Maya Angelou how to read. They taught John Lewis how to read, and nobody talks about it. It's the flip side of Tulsa. It's the positive Tulsa. And there's a million Tulsas out there, these stories and these narratives, right? So I tell my kids all the time, and they know it. They recite it to me. 90% of people can point out the problems. 10% have the guts to try to solve them, right?
I love what you just said there about the opposite of Tulsa, but to be specific, the Tulsa massacre, because the whole reason Black Wall Street was even a thing is, to your point, Brian, that there were people that made a conscious effort to bring Tulsa, that wealth there.
Right. Yes. And Tulsa is but one of 1,000 of those. Yes. Exactly. Wilmington, East St. Louis, Detroit in 1919. I mean, I could go on, as you guys know, I could go on and talk about that list forever, right? I mean, that's part of who we are, right? And it's part of a battle in terms of what people are being fed that we have to learn from. We have to have the guts, frankly, in terms of solution number 1, is we have to have the guts for truth and reconciliation as North Americans, right? And all with different issues, and Canadians have done it. They've stuck their toe in the water, I'll call it, right? There's still 6,000, kids that have to be unearthed at Indian resettlement schools. We know that. Everybody knows that. But we've got to have the guts to face it. Just as Americans have to have the guts to face it, like Rwanda, like Canada to a degree, like South Africa, like Germany, where we made them do it. We stuck their noses in it after World War II. If you look for for instance, if you look for Hitler's bunker in Germany, it's a parking lot. Robert E. Lee lost the Civil War and there were 1,200 monuments erected. What are we doing, right? What in terms of what we're feeding people? That's crazy, right? And similarly, in Germany, well, more current times. On January 6th, somebody stormed the Capitol of government in the United States with a Confederate flag, a lot of Confederate flags. In Germany, if you show a swastika, it's punishable by up to 3 years in jail. What are we doing? Let's face it down, right?
Just to talk about that, it's really important. We're discussing the importance, about unlearning and moving forward, but not just unlearning, but also actionable steps. Because what I love about Black Girl Hockey Club, and I will speak for myself, is that it's about action. It's not just about the discussion. Learning and education, we know, is an important piece, but the practical implementation of steps is what has to happen. And
absolutely.
you know, like we're talking about bright spots here. So Moose, give me some bright spots.
All right, so I'm going to talk about my teammate Soraya Tinker, and I don't want to. I'm not going to, you know, quote her because I don't have the exact words, but just in conversations with her and you know, following her and you know, any interview she does, I pay close attention to. So what she shared with the public, and I think it's important to mention because it makes me realize how impactful having these conversations really is. So it's a bright spot for me personally, because I think it's important to mention the context. Again, going back to like before this past season, NWHL season started, we had a lot of conversations as a team virtually, right? Just like everybody else, because we weren't in person together. We were like, wow, this is going to be a season where it's just going to be completely different. We might not get to know each other as well off the ice, you know, as we would in a normal season. So we made sure to have a lot of, you know, Zoom calls and whatnot. I also had a lot of conversations with Tink individually. I wanted to get to know her. I, as a leader, wanted to make sure that she felt comfortable stepping onto the Riveters as our only Black player. So, and I also just want to get to know her better, right? All my teammates. And I think that going back to like what she shared publicly is that she's never been a part of a team that has had those conversations. And again, I'm going to butcher like exactly how she feels about it, but my understanding was that she just felt very safe as a member of the Riveters, and that means so much to me. You know, as a leader on the team, that, you know, to know that we helped facilitate that environment for her. And, you know, she did a lot of work too. And you know, in holding us accountable, in, you know, being comfortable speaking about her stance on things. I think that's a huge bright spot, because it demonstrates the impact that doing something as simple as just acknowledging race can be so powerful for someone and making them, you know, feel comfortable on a hockey team. And it's right. It's not a lot to ask, you know, for her to just feel comfortable with her teammates who are, you know, who should be her sisters or brothers or any. But yeah, that's a huge bright spot for me, because it demonstrates that strides have been made. Still have a long way to go. But I think it was just very powerful to hear her say that on numerous occasions, and you know that you know, I played a very small role in that, and you know, hopefully then, you know, in the future we can start to build on that, and you know, she can feel even more comfortable as part of the team, because I know, just knowing her story previously and the conversations that we had prior to the season, that hasn't always been the case, where she feels supported by her teammates and comfortable talking about different things. So that was huge.
And if I can, and we're going to be uncomfortable and we're going to talk about this, but the intersections at which things lie to Moose. There was chat, and we talk about the Hockey Diversity Alliance, and, you know, it wasn't without its criticism. And one of the things that I love, again, from the Black Girl Hockey Club community is the authenticity with which that, and the lenses with which those, you know, those feedback, those criticisms come. And there's intersections within hockey that women's hockey cannot be excluded from. Like sometimes we talk and, you know, we're quick to criticize the NHL, but I mean, women's hockey doesn't have without its issues. So very specifically, if you can touch upon the conversations that were uncomfortable, also involving Barstool in your own locker room. Like, what was that like? It was a mess from what everybody else saw, but like, you know, if you can, you know, expand on how you navigated that in your leadership role.
Yeah, that was obviously a very difficult time while we're in the middle of playing hockey, you know, very short bubble season, and unfortunately being bombarded with that. But I think, to be honest, you know, I was very unhappy with how it was handled by at a number of different levels. I think it's important to be transparent about that. But in terms of what the conversations that we had as a team. I think a lot of it, there were definitely conversations as a team. Like we had team meetings, some of which were led by, our leadership, our captains group within the Riveters, some of which were led by our PA, the league, the NWHL. And I think that was certainly helpful, and nobody's really privy to those conversations that are happening within a locker room. But obviously that's separate from, what should have been done on a larger scale, and in terms of, statements that were made in the public, and sharing with them what's going on in the bubble, because they're obviously nobody was there, no fans were there or anything. But I think a lot of the conversations too happened on an individual level. And what made me feel really good is just knowing that a lot of my teammates, a lot of members of the Riveters had reached out to Soroya on an individual level, just to make sure she was okay. Because it's still difficult for me to talk about. Honestly, I can't imagine how hard it is for her. I know that she's very good at sort of blocking out the haters. It's something that I admire about her so much. She's capable of laughing it off a lot. But I took that personally, as she was being targeted, and the end of the day, we're battling together on the ice, and she's a friend of mine, she's my teammate. So I reached out to her too to make sure that she was okay, and also trying to respect her space, and obviously it doesn't just impact her. There are implications for any player of color within the league. She's not the only one. I know that, like I said, I was having a difficult time with it, so I definitely needed emotional support. So I had conversations individually with my teammates who weren't named Soroya Tinker, and just the fact that we were all able to speak about it, because we had there's no way to prepare for a situation like that, right? But the fact that we had already had conversations surrounding race, I think it was a lot easier for people to talk about it amongst themselves, or it wasn't something new, wasn't something that we expected to be bombarded with in the bubble. But we also had conversations around hey, look, the spotlight's on us right now in this, very shortened season. So, there might be some controversy surrounding different issues. And, I know as a player who did kneel during the national anthem, I felt very supported by my teammates, all of my teammates, in doing so. And we had this understanding and essentially an agreement that, regardless of whether you chose to stand or kneel during the national anthem, we were all going to support one another in their decisions. So sort of went off on a tangent there, but again, I think the biggest takeaway there is just having conversations prior to allow an event like that, when an event like that occurs, if it does, we've already at least done some of the work to be able to have those conversations openly, and to recognize that this is somebody being targeted, and this is incredibly wrong, and she needs our support right now, and we need to support each other through this, because we're all dealing with this in a different way, in our own unique way. So I think there was a lot of growth that came from that, but also a lot of lessons that were learned, and what could have been done better, I'll say.
And I thank you so much for that answer. Erica, I know you're a moderator, but I want to ask you, I want to put you in the chair and be like, give me some bright spots, because we were talking about this, and you and I talked about before this, holding joy as a concept and what that's like. And it's not always joyous. I mean, I work in media. It's not exactly unicorns and rainbows, but for you're in this space, you've been in space a long time. You're one of the elite reporters in this, understanding, having the nuance. Tell me about bright spots.
Wow. I feel like a lot of the bright spots have been mentioned. I don't know if y'all can tell, but I'm totally geeking out with Brian's dropping knowledge, Dylan style over here, just killing it. So I'm loving that. And Brian's work is a bright spot for me because I do take history very seriously in the work that I do in the present. And his ability to do that and to incorporate the story of Willie O'Ree into lessons from Willie. I come from a background, he was talking, for those who may not know, about the Children's March earlier, and children in Birmingham, Alabama, were the ones that went to Dr. King and then got Stokely Carmichael to agree to help organize them. And so young people in the space and educating young people, but more so, I don't even want to say allowing, I almost use that word and I try not to, empowering young people to be exactly who they need to be in the moment that they need to be almost always benefits us all. So Bryant is a bright spot. I have to honestly say Black Girl Hockey Club is a bright spot. And Moose and I talked about this elsewhere, but me being in the hockey space has made me realize, as a Black woman, as a Latina, how much trauma I've held on to as a Division I softball player. I didn't have a Black girl softball club. And so the conversations that I was having as someone who grew up in New York, went down to the South, in the early 2000s to play softball and to get an education. That's what I thought I was there for. And I learned that me just being there created a magnet for a lot of things that, even though I talk about, I wasn't prepared to experience. And so Black Girl Hockey Club has allowed me to heal some of those wounds. And I talked about this, someone else asked me this, and I think that's extremely important to understand, that there is a lot that people carry, whether it's explicitly because they identify with the Black part, the girl part, or the hockey part of Black Girl Hockey Club. A lot of us carry that, and it's a balm for me. And I get the sense that it's been a balm for others. So, Bryant was the one taking the lashes, and hopefully Black Girl Hockey Club is providing the balm. Another thing that I will say is just being able to be a part of the women's hockey space in particular has been a bright spot, because again, I've learned a lot. I've obviously been able to build out a career, but there are things similarly to what Moose said that I have had to learning about Harrison, and of course Jessica Platt, who, Tara, I know you've interviewed, has been great. And shout out to Jessica, especially because she's a May 8th baby too. Got to put that out there. But so we're birthday twins. I love to put that out there. But those things are so important. And it has been amazing to see in a short period of time from my engagement in women's hockey, the strides that are being made. And I want to give a shout out to, she's not a Riveter, but I'm still going to give a shout out to Nina Rogers, because during the end double season, and particularly during the playoffs, during the restart, she wore a Say Her Name shirt. And I asked her about that. And Nina, for people who may not know, is a relatively soft-spoken person, doesn't do a lot of media, and is not, I would argue, unfortunately, not someone that media often engages. She had a fantastic season with the Whitecaps this past season in particular, but for her to take that step in getting uncomfortable, for someone who doesn't often use her voice and isn't often asked to use her voice, for her to wear that shirt, I think was another bright spot, and showing that there are things, and getting uncomfortable, it stinks, it doesn't feel good. Sometimes your body really wants to fight it, but it almost always ends up, for yourself and certainly for others, being that bright spot. And that kind of goes to some of the things that I wanted to circle back to you, Moose, again, because I see we have a question here from Bonnie, and Christina asked Brian a question, and I know they've been engaging, but I want to go back to this idea because, again, we're talking about the hockey community, and the front-facing talent are the players, right? And so what are some of the things that players can do, and what are some of the things that you are committing to as a player to engage these questions in ways that maybe you haven't before?
Sure. So I think the way that I see my role in all of this is sort of bridging the gap between players who are white players in the league because they're predominantly white, and players of color, players from all different backgrounds, who might be uncomfortable, might be interested in becoming an ally and might be uncomfortable with it, because I was in that position not too long ago. And I think there were people, if somebody had extended a hand to me and making me feel just like welcome to have those conversations, I might have done it sooner. I think that I touched on earlier, George Floyd was really the catalyst for me. But Erica, honestly, it was kind of through you and your social justice and women's hockey YouTube series where I was like, oh, I can talk about this. There are other people talking about this. There are other women in women's hockey. It like gave me authority to be able to have those conversations. So like that's the first thing I think, or the biggest thing is just if somebody has questions and they might not feel comfortable going to a person of color, for example, or to be honest, they maybe shouldn't first, because we shouldn't put the burden on them to educate others. I want to be that person to help do that. I think it's important to have conversations with people of different backgrounds at some point, but I consider myself, or at least try to like be somebody who's safe to talk to about anything, not just conversations surrounding race, but the LGBTQ plus community, whatever it may be. I think just by speaking out myself and I'm inviting others to do so, or at least feel comfortable asking questions. So I think that's the biggest thing. Part of what we did back in the bubble too, as a team, is we've had this tradition within the Riveters where we put money on the board. A lot of times it was kind of like a fine type thing, like if you're late for something, or you just want to motivate the team, to win the game, you'll throw money on the board before the game starts, and then if we and then you pay it at the end. It goes into like a fine jar type thing, and we use it maybe for like a team celebration at the end of the season. Instead of doing that, that money went to Black Girl Hockey Club from the games that we played in the bubble, and just seeing it different players get involved and put money on the board. That was really powerful, I think. And it wasn't just players, it was our staff too, which was cool, and league staff, I believe. There was somebody from the league who put money on the board for us. That was amazing. That's something that's actionable, that does make an impact. And I think it extended to just beyond our own locker room, where fans were getting involved and contributing, and different stakeholders in the community. So those are just a couple examples of actionable items that I've taken individually and as a part of the NWHL and a member of the Riveters.
That is so important, Moose, that you're stepping up to take that role as a leader and as a player and as a teammate. And I think one of the things I also want to shout out, because she loves getting shout out, Dr. Courtney Cito is doing a bunch of anti-oppression learning with the PWHPA, and it's really important. It's literally this lens of anti-oppression, and it encompasses so many things. It encompasses anti-Asian hate as well, anti-indigeneity and anti-Blackness, and all these intersections that we talk about, encouraging people, because it was from the players that the idea of land recognition stickers came up for the Dream Gap Tour. And that's really important, because when you learn, you are empowered. You're not allowed, and I love that correction that Erica made, you are empowered to make those changes and step up to carry the mantle for people who don't have privilege, for racialized people, for Black folks who are having to, who are at the forefront of fighting anti-racism. So I'm very mindful of time. And I know that that the DOC, Dr. Tanisha Singleton, you wanted to bring it in?
Sure. Of course. I've just been back here, listening to everyone and taking notes and really just soaking this in, because damn, y'all, like this, this is heavy. This is a lot, but it's very, very important. It's very, very significant. And, as Bryant said, this is so rooted in history, and we all have to get organized. And I think in order to do that, our first step is to really open our mouths. You see something, say something. We have to start holding each other accountable. That's been something that's been going on in the YouTube chat about, echoing those types of sentiments as well, and how to roll up our sleeves and do more. I know Christina in the chat was mentioning how to start creating, how do you get your foot in the door and creating programs for diversity and inclusion and these types of things. And you kick the door down, you start. No one is inaccessible these days. You ask, you pound every door, you hit the pavement, maybe not now, it's kind of hot in the LA area. But you ask, you spam, you just you don't take no for an answer. You start and look at the landscape. Who's currently doing the work that you want to start as well? Who can you partner with? Who's already making those types of footprints and seeds that you can help water and grow in your own community? Because there's nothing involved in this conversation that we've talked about over the last 90 minutes that is going to be a copy and paste quick solution. What needs to happen in Detroit is going to be different than Vegas. It's going to be different in Manitoba. It's going to be different in Florida, so on and so forth. So we have to activate our own humility, our own level of awareness, and start to say, okay, look, what can I do in my lane? What do I have control over? We can only control what we can control, right? We're not privy to Facebook, giant conglomerates, all of these things. So we have to look at what we can actually impact and start to see observable incremental change. Once we do that, then we can start to see, all right, this is who I can partner with. This is what I can do in my community. Do an audit of where you're at. What can you do? And you don't take no for an answer. One of the things I want to quickly touch upon and just wrapping up is I noticed Dr. Neil Lewis Jr., he's an assistant professor at Cornell and a behavioral scientist. He posted an article titled "Why Many Americans Can't See the Wealth Gap Between White and Black America." And there's a sentence in here that I think is so profound, and it hit upon several of the things that everyone a part of this event has touched on. And I'm going to pull it up right now and just quickly read this quote. He says, to better understand why this happens and why so many people still misunderstand disparity outcomes, he reviewed and synthesized a bunch of research across social sciences. And what he found, in short, is that the biases we have that led us to see some things but not others, this does not exist in vacuums. They come from the same segregated and racialized neighborhoods and institutions that we go right back to when the diversity trainings are over. Our environments and institutions reinforce our biases. So if our social structures don't fundamentally change, it's difficult to change the people within them. And I think that is huge, that is profound, and that can certainly be applied when it comes to hockey culture and helping change this narrative for better and sustainable change. I want to thank absolutely all of you here. Erica, Queen Shireen, thank you for co-hosting this. To our panelists, Bryant, Tara, Rebecca, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want everyone watching either via YouTube or here in our Zoom webinar, you all have some homework because I have bestowed, I'm officially ordained if you guys didn't know. So I have given the educator a gift to Bryant, Rebecca, and Tara as well. So they have all given you some homework, okay? So on the Eventbrite page where you registered, you will be available to download another tremendous document that we have gathered that not only includes a lot of infographics and reflections and some takeaway information, but these three have also given you some homework. And we want you to share it as well, because this is going to be an ongoing conversation, right? We all have to do our part. So we've asked the three of them to pose the question back to you. What have you unlearned as a way to combat white supremacy? Now, in this document, the three of them have notated their own answers to this, but we want you to write down your answers as well and share them with us on social media. So make sure that you download this resource guide that's on our Eventbrite page once you that you've registered for this event and you will be able to see it. And then also, and just in closing, to wrap things up a little bit, I want to thank everybody for their solidarity donations as well. I want to remind you that we have another event coming up on June 23rd. This is going to be on Instagram Live at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 Eastern. And that is going to be with our founder and executive director, Renee, and Mohammed Fofana from the San Jose Sharks from the Teal for Change Committee. So you don't want to miss that as well. And also, we are always accepting mentors for our new leadership and development program. So we want to make sure that everyone, that all aspects of the game that we are able to provide relationships with. So marketing, social media, broadcast, hockey relations, operations, analysis, biz dev, all of the things. If you work in one of these spaces and you want to mentor a young Black girl or boy to help them get into, to help mentor them into developing some personal and professional skills, then make sure you go to blackgirlhockeyclub.org and submit your application. So with that, I want to thank everybody again. This has been tremendous. We've all got some work to do. So make sure that you all share your resources with us. Tag us on social media when you submit your answers. I want to know. Really want to know what you guys are doing, because like Dr. Neil Lewis said in that piece, after the diversity and training is over, now what? You can't just show up. It's not going to be an attendance thing. We're not just going to check box and then you can go on and still act wild. This has to be a continuing relationship, a continuing effort. That's what civic engagement is, okay? So make sure that you tag us on social media when you post your answers. And with that, I again want to say thank you to everybody. Happy Juneteenth. Erica, Shireen, thank you again. This was amazing. You guys held it down. Bryant, Tara, Moose, thank you all for your transparency, your authenticity, and keeping it real with us. We really, really appreciate it. We know these conversations aren't hard. I mean, they are hard. They're not easy, hence get uncomfortable. But we thank you for not only opening yourselves up for us all and sharing this, but your realness and authenticity and holding these conversations. So with that, thank you all. Be safe, be well, and happy Juneteenth.